Welcome to the Boom Clap podcast where culture and conviction collide. I'm Rita Rogers.
And I'm Cecily Dickey.
Today we have on with us Leah Wilson of Stand for Health Freedom. She is the executive director and co-founder. We spoke with you, I was just looking back, the beginning of this year. Feels like longer somehow. Does it feel like longer to you?
Maybe. Yeah, absolutely does. Yeah, I thought you were going to say it 1 year ago or something like that.
No. So we're kind of wrapping up the year with an episode with you and started the year off with you. And maybe it's because what we were talking about right before we came on, having these littles and things that are still so dependent on us. Maybe that's why it feels longer. I don't know, but it definitely does. So last time we talked very much about the health freedom realm and medical freedom and HIPAA and all of those things. We'll link to that episode in the show notes because it was very good. But the reason we're having you on today is to talk specifically about voting, why it matters, because within the medical freedom community, which you are very much tied to by what you do, there is a large sect of people I'm finding that are either disenchanted with voting. They're not going to do it anymore. They don't understand the purpose at this point in time with the corruption and things, or people who feel that voting is somehow contracting them to the government to be governed and taking away their freedom by way of voting. So people are choosing not to participate in this election. And I still think it's important to vote. I still think that our elections, even though we know that there's corruption, matter. So I wanted to have this conversation with you today. And actually, I do want to mention to our listeners, we invited a couple people on to give their perspective from a sovereign point of view. And nobody could make it or wanted to come on. So just saying, we wanted to have more of a debate discussion style, but that is not happening at this time. So we'll just have our point of view, understanding what the other point of view is and hoping to speak to that. Did you know during the coronavirus years, poison control centers saw a 20% jump in calls related to cleaning products? This is because of the bleach, all-purpose cleaners, antibacterial cleaners that people were using around their homes. And regardless of your fear during that time and your increase in cleaning, a lot of people just in general use these products around their home. And not only are they bad for you to potentially ingest, but they also are absorbing into your skin. Your skin is an organ. This is where Rocasa Organics comes in. They have cleaning products with natural organic ingredients that you can pronounce, that you know what they are, and they are safe for you and your family to use. You can feel comfortable using them. They also have lotions and soaps and just a wide array of products that you can use in your home. I know our house has Rocasa in basically every room now. So go to rocasaorganics.com and use the code BOOMCLAP to save 20% off your first order. We want you to be aware that this episode was scheduled to air October 2nd, but we've pushed it out early so all of you who are participating in early voting and making concrete decisions now can have access to this episode. In doing so, though, some of the information about upcoming and previous episodes that we state is not accurate. However, the upcoming episodes we do mention are all coming. They're just coming later in October. And we certainly hope you stick around for them. If you are passionate about medical freedom, we have 2 conversations in October that I know you will love. One is on brain death and organ donation. And the other is a conversation about medical freedom, informed consent, vaccines. And I'm just going to go ahead and keep that guest a surprise, but I know you will love her. We hope you enjoy this episode with Leah Wilson, and we absolutely hope that you stick around and become part of our community. All right. So, Leah, I don't know if you have anything to start off with just about, I guess, from your perspective in what you do. Can you just tell people what you do and why you are someone able to speak to this, because you see the difference being involved in your elections and being involved with your specifically local politics, how that makes a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Stand for Health Freedom, we noticed that we were able to, I'll just say from the outset, as an organization, we do not believe that every single person in government is corrupt and lost and a lost cause. We have found people who share our convictions, even those who have the backbone to be true to those convictions, who are not sold out, and building partnerships and relationships with those on the inside of the system to influence policy has been effective. We've influenced over 74 pieces of legislation to expand or protect health freedom. And those relationships are a direct testament to that effort. So we were noticing that having these relationships within our state houses, within local government, and within Congress to an extent was beneficial, but that we needed to continue to make it harder for people to stand against us and easier for people to stand with us within the policy work. So in 2022, medical mandates became one of the ballot box issues. You know, people were like, whoa, how have we gotten ourselves here? How do we co-create this existence where it's not necessarily our elected officials that have all this power? It's the bureaucrats, it's the system at large that have this power. And it's also the private sector. You know, there's an unequal power grab when you're talking about I guess, if you will, some people would refer to they as the global elite, those that kind of set the pattern or the energy of policy through Amazon and Google and Facebook and all these huge companies within your own towns, the pharmaceutical companies, the hospital corporations. And so those, private entities having an unequal power relationship with the workers, with the individuals within the community. And so at that point in time in 2022, when we were on the heels of people losing their jobs, losing their education based on a vaccination mandate, a mask mandate, quarantine mandates, health freedom became a ballot box issue. And so we started Vote for Health Freedom to vet candidates and give people an informed vote so that we could not only work within the policy realm, but also have the accountability mechanisms to say, hey, we're going to let people know what your record is if you've really put the proof in the pudding, and put out this year, we're starting scorecards to say, all right, here's who we supported and endorsed in 2022. How did they fare until now, the next election cycle in 24? We notice doors open and the people become a larger stakeholder through that process. And it's interesting to watch the conversations change when we have something of value to bring to them as stakeholders in public health, because that's really our desire, is that the people become the primary stakeholders in public health again. Because the vision for America is that the family is the primary power structure, that the family is the dominant power structure. And if we just sit back and say, oh, well, government's growing and we're just going to exclude ourselves, where does that put us? Especially because, I don't want to spoil everything at once, but I can guarantee you that people who are complaining about the system are using the roads. They're going into grocery stores. They are using parking spots or waterways or highways, these types of things, the general infrastructure of a city that exists we depend on our thriving cities for the sustenance of our families. And that's why it matters to stay engaged politically, to say the least. So that's sort of where we are at Stand for Health Freedom, affecting policy. And policy is not just the president. It's not the president at all as it relates to us. And it's not just Congress, but it's in large part your state General Assembly. So that means you have two lawmakers that represent you in your state house. One is in your House of Representatives, one is in your state Senate. And then on the local level, you have people who represent you in your county and town, in town or city, whatever you call it there. And those are also policymakers in executive positions. And so knowing what's going on that level is really what you're going to feel closest to home.
Yeah. And corruption can happen at all levels. It can absolutely. We're seeing it with the wind and energy movement. Those county board people can all of a sudden start driving shiny new cars. Like, where did that come from? The corruption can happen at every level. So it is very important to be involved. One thing you said is the people complaining are using these government, taxpayer funded businesses and roads and all of these things. But another thing that struck me as interesting, as I hear people message me that they are not voting, it doesn't matter to them. And they'll literally message me, like, when I say you are still impacted, they'll be like, no, I'm not. I'm not. I'm like, okay, but you literally started following me during COVID because I was speaking out against COVID, and you appreciated my voice against what the policies were that the government was making. So clearly, you were affected in some manner if you cared enough to listen and promote alternative narratives to what the government was putting out, right?
And even if it's just, let's say you are a self-sufficient person, you have nailed homesteading, you do not rely on any food supply outside of your family, so no commerce within your city. You don't take out any loans because you have cash for every car, for every house, for everything that you do, for every business you start. So let's say you are completely self-sufficient. There are some people who still stay engaged because they don't like the injustice. They don't like what they see happening to the next generation. Maybe it's their grandchildren. They might be a homesteader, but their children and grandchildren aren't. And the reality is that whatever is happening in the schoolhouses of our communities is the future of tomorrow. That's what's going to, whatever the overlay of their education, of what they are complicit with or comply with or acquiesce within, is going to shape the future of America. And there's a reason why we've been a beacon of freedom for hundreds of years. And it's because the people were engaged enough. We came from it. If you look at our population historically as settlers, we came from like grit of taking responsibility for our existence and for what's happening around us. And now saying we're going to take responsibility by completely disengaging is unfortunate with what we have to preserve as a longstanding democracy.
Yeah, when I think about what it must be like from the other perspective, like when I think of these people that choose to completely disengage, not to vote, to not acknowledge the role of the government, to me, it appears more like a forfeit, we give up, we surrender. And I think from their perspective, they're thinking we're strong, we're standing up, we're taking a stand against this totally corrupt and broken system. But actually, I think how it works out is more like a forfeit.
I agree.
One of the simplest illustrations is, are you going to take your ball and go home?
Right.
If you don't like the rules at the playground, are you just going to pick up your ball and run home? And
pick sand and pout.
As an adult, what that looks like is in totalitarian communist communities, the people have zero say in politics. So if we choose to disengage today, to remove our voice today, are we co-creating something worse rather than at least holding the line? Holding the line against what we see in communist countries, or even having the vision and the hope to push back that line, to work toward the essence of our Constitution, which is limited government. And it is a separation of powers and accountability by the people. And none of us are, living in a fantasy land. We clearly see that there's a lot wrong with the system, and that there's a lot of theater going on, and we're not happy with what we see. But our response is what's in question. Like, what is our response? And does our response move the ball down the field?
Well, what you said reminded me of like a concern that I had coming out of the COVID years, is that the healthcare system lost so many doctors and nurses that were willing to take a stand for what they believed was right. And then what we're left with, and there's still wonderful people in the healthcare system, obviously, but we've lost a lot of those voices who are willing to just stand out and say the things that make people uncomfortable and to fight for the things that are right. And then we're left with a healthcare system that looks even less like what we want it to. And I think that's just the perfect case study for what you're saying, how this can continue to devolve into a country and a world that we never thought possible, just because and in the case of what we're talking about right now, people are actually just voluntarily taking themselves out of the fight, right? Whereas what happened with COVID, a lot of these people were involuntarily taken out, but we're still seeing the repercussions from it.
And that's not just healthcare. I mean, if you flush any system of a single ideology, you're left with a dominant ideology. There's no counterbalance. And in our military, that was a huge concern. If you're going to take every member of our military who wants to object to an experimental vaccination out, then what are we left with? And I mean, leaving the size of the military as an even separate issue, but being flushed of an ideology in our education system. And you can go on to see how this can affect a society. And you know what? I am all about give people full information and let them choose. Like if you have full information and you've seen enough writing on the wall that you're exiting a certain system, great. Because I do think that as a society, as a community, that we can make some of these corrupt structures irrelevant. And once enough people opt out and choose to co-create something different and choose to co-create a different reality for our children and grandchildren, then they'll simply become irrelevant and we can stop turning our wheels trying to fix something that it's hard to flush. It's hard to drain the swamp, as people use that term a lot. So when it's tough to drain the swamp, why don't we look at what it looks like outside of the swamp?
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Cecily, I just have to say, we're so on the same page this morning. I literally wrote down, this is just like the hospital. So it's so good when our minds are like on the complete same page. But
that's awesome.
Because people they'll message you and be like, you just need to find a job in natural healthcare. I'm like, but then that's leaving. And they'll be like, we don't need the hospital. I'm like, you're telling me you'll never have somebody in a car accident. Like you'll never know somebody that was in a trauma, And so it's such a parallel conversation, really. And then back to the communism portion that you talked about, Leah, my kids and I are doing a Hillsdale course on Marxism, communism. And I love their courses, like huge plug for their free courses. They're free, amazing learning experiences for you and your kids. But they were talking about Russia, then they moved to China, and we're talking about Mao, and then eventually moved to the 80s and the Tiananmen Square incident, and where like all these college students had like a standoff for a couple months, I think it was, basically just asking for a voice within their government, just wanting to talk to the government officials. And eventually they were killed. They don't even know how many. Some people say it was hundreds. Some people say it was like 10,000. But no voice in government. And so when we have these discussions as Americans, I personally see it as a bunch of idealistic Americans with these ideas of how great things could be, which is amazing. Like that's how we should be. We should have better ideas, right? And be pushing for better all the time. But at the same time, we can't be so blind to what we have here compared to other places. Because as far as I can tell, people always say, we're leaving if blah, blah, blah. But no one ever does. Like, no one actually packs up their bags and moves to China or, North Korea or any of these places, or any places that are better than those two that I just mentioned. But, we don't see people just packing their bags and leaving.
There are a lot of people who make their bucket list off of if this is checked, I'm going to Puerto Rico, or I'm going to Dominican Republic, or, whatever the next best free place is that you can own land, that a foreigner can own land. Yeah. However, you're always trading one corruption for another, and when you go to a third world country or a developing country that might seem more appealing than the overdeveloped US, then what does that mean for when you need an emergency room, when there are kidnapping issues, et cetera, et cetera? So you're always trading corruption for corruption in some way, shape, or form. And I personally, I'm not willing to give up on America. I'm still patriotic. Like I still am proud of the American experiment and what we've offered to the world as a Christian nation, as a beacon of hope and with open arms. And, there's so much nuance to all of that this day and age, and so much division around how we approach it. But if we keep in mind what we actually stand for and the principles that we stand for, and in God we trust, that we've sent out more humanitarian aid than any other country. We've sent out more people to minister on a soul level to other humans across the world than any other country. And we're only able to do that because of our prosperity, because of the position that we are in, the policies that we have had to create. Creativity is a huge threat to communism. You're not supposed to be a thinker as an individual citizen. And so it is, I'm still American. I'm not willing to give up. I'm not going to throw in the towel or give up my citizenship. If I went to a different country, I wouldn't even get dual citizenship. You know what I mean? I'm going to keep my American citizenship. And I feel like that's where what I was born into. And not that I have anything against any other nation, but I do believe that there's still something to be salvaged and something to hope for within our borders.
Yeah. Yes. American exceptionalism does not have to be an arrogant stance. You can just believe in what we have here. Okay, so when people tell me they're not voting, I made a list of the common phrases, and it's really not that long because almost everyone has a similar reason to a lot of other people of why they're not voting. So I'm going to read down those really quick, and then we can just kind of go through them individually if that's okay. So this is what I typically hear. It's all theater. It's a selection, not an election. We don't participate in the government of this world. We belong to the kingdom of heaven. I put faith in God, not in man. Two wings, same bird. The candidates are all awful. My vote doesn't count. It's not worth it anymore. And this is typically based on either corruption or a solidly red or solidly blue state where they feel like they don't have any sway because it's electoral college. And then the last one, it feels empowering. Feels being the key word. All right, so let's run down the list of those common, repeated statements. I think it's easy to have like a phrase like that. And I think that we're seeing this more and more on social media, that people just like repeat phrases and it's the same thing for everybody. And it just like loses the nuance. And to me, it just sounds like when you're repeating, it's a selection, not an election. Like, okay, but what does that really mean? That's why I want to go through these phrases. Like, what does that actually mean when you say it? And is that actually true? Because it's easy to repeat a phrase, but oftentimes it just loses the nuance and it's not actually true, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not wholly true.
Well, I think sometimes we lose our grit, and it's easy to define something in clear terms and pick a position so that we can get out of the fight, which I don't blame people. Sometimes we just want out of the fight. Like we just want to have our own peace and be unaffected by the chaos, which spiritually there's a way to do both. There's a way to stay engaged, but hover above that chaos. It's not either or, So to speak to that nuance, is it really either or is there something to be said about staying in the fight, but knowing that we already know the end of the story? So let's do it.
That's so true, because I think that's the problem is people have a lot of trouble right now with the anxiety of being in the fight. And so they do want to remove themselves. And also I think that goes along with the anxiety that's there. People find some kind of safety in knowing. Like if I know this for certain, if there is no nuance, there's like a safety in that.
Right. It's how we live with tag and treat in the medical world. If we can find a diagnosis and relinquish ourselves to having an identity in that diabetes, you know what I mean? Like, oh, the reason you're functioning this way is because you are a diabetic. And then you live your life as a diabetic the rest of your life. You know what I mean? Like that identity that can be wrapped up in the knowing. But I hear you.
All right. So it's all theater.
So would it be okay?
All theater.
I know, all theater. And would it be okay if I play this little clip?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I was just this morning, one of our team members sent me this clip and I thought it was really timely. And Representative Massey, he's a congressman from the state of Kentucky, and we've worked with him on food freedom issues. And we endorsed him in his 2022 election, or endorsing him again in 24. But here's what he's saying, to speak to that theater. We're not denying that there's a whole lot of theater going on. So let's hear what he says about this.
Can we be honest with the American people about what's going on here? This is political theater. I'm going to call out both sides right here. It's all posturing. It's fake fighting. We all know where it ends up. This is Groundhog Day. I don't care if the Democrat is the speaker or Republican is the speaker. We always get a CR in September, and then we get an omnibus. Sometimes there's a twist on that. We might get the omnibus before Christmas, but if we're not good, it comes after Christmas.
And I'm pausing it. What he's talking about, the CR, is because they can't agree on a budget. So they're just going to continue the status quo of the prior budget, and just to get out of the fight, essentially, because no one can agree. Okay, so that's what he's saying is we're just going to continue last year's budget instead of actually coming to any solutions.
But that's what's going to happen. And in the meantime, it's political theater. We've got it's good theater. We've got great writers. I wish they'd just come up with a new plot. It's the same plot every fiscal year. What should we be doing? It's already been discussed. We should have done 12 separate bills. But again, whether Democrats are in control or Republicans are in control, we never do the 12 separate bills. Why do we always spend at least as much as we did last year, and why do we never cut spending? It's because Democrats want to grow the welfare state and Republicans want to grow the military-industrial complex. And we're eventually going to get together, and they're both going to go up. I guarantee it. And both parties are just fine letting the bureaucrats do their thing, which should be our thing, according to Article 1, Section 8 in the Constitution. We are empowered with these things. Most important of the things we do is the funding.
So the reason funding is so important is because spending is what determines the power our government has. And that's why our states have lost so much of our state sovereignty, like our solid backed state sovereignty, because we've become reliant on the federal spending. So our schools, what percentage of their budget is coming from the federal government? So they have to fall in line with the strings attached with federal spending. Our Medicare, Medicaid systems, what is the influence in regards to funding? And so Massey is calling out this theater saying, look, we're never moving the ball down the field. And then he goes on to say, we've uncovered corruption in the FBI, the DOJ. We've uncovered corruption with the response to the pandemic within the CDC, the FDA's regulations. And yet we're not changing their funding or doing anything about it. And my question is, would we rather disengage and flush our government of people like Congressman Massey, who are willing to educate the public, to use his bully pulpit to be vigilant and call things out and let us know what's going on from the inside? So if there's still value, even if we don't like how the system is working today, there is value in having quality candidates that we elect on the inside of the system. Because eventually, when the court of public opinion changes enough, when there is enough light, when that veil of darkness is pulled back enough, then there will be a shift. There will be a cultural shift once there is enough truth heard by enough people, and people quit tolerating this and cooperating with creating things that don't result in freedom. So I'm thankful that we can elect people like Congressman Massey, and that he has the American public's back, and that he's saying, he says, I'm voting hell no on the Continuing Appropriations and Other Matter Act this week. I don't care what bright, shiny object is attached to it, or what fake fight we start and won't finish. Congress is spending our country into oblivion. So there are folks that are standing up, bringing the truth to the public so that we have an opportunity to expand on that and partner with people like him in going the other direction. And I think that was the gift of COVID, is that the reality is more people are engaged, more people care, more people are running for office, more people are supporting good people in office. And guess what, friends? It's been a short 4 years. It's been a short 4 years of undoing a whole lot of bad. And I have been encouraged about what I have seen in terms of the doors open, the vigilance that is heeded by the people inside of the state houses, and even the media coverage that we've gotten. So yes, there is way too much theater, and yes, the uniparty is maddening, but progress is still being made, and the court of public opinion matters a whole lot. So even if it's a broken system, the light that can be shined is invaluable.
Well, I think what people do, like what a movement does, is it takes a tiny little piece of truth, like the fact that there is some theater, and just applies it broadly over the whole thing. And that clip that you played, really, that's proof. Like, he's calling out the theater. So if a part of that system is calling out the theater, then the whole system can't be theater, you know? So
that's a good point. Yeah.
Right.
Because when I get these messages about it's all theater, literally people are telling me they're all actors. And I'm like, guys, I mean, I don't even know what to say. I mean,
and you know, the response to that would be that Massey was put in that position to give that spiel to just keep Americans hopeful enough. You know what I mean? To keep us attached enough to the power structure. And I think that we were given discernment for a reason. And there's probably plenty of times that's true, friends. I'm not saying that's never true, that good people infiltrate the people's movements in order to make sure that we keep swimming in this specific direction, that we keep following these specific leaders. And I think that's why it's important to just remain vigilant and keep our eyes open and know who we are following, because otherwise we're just swept into a current of mainstream opinion, and in large part by Google, who determines our values and everything that we think.
Yeah. What you're describing is what people call controlled opposition when good people infiltrate. And I have recently said many times to Cecily, like, what makes people think? So people are so sure the CIA like does mind control experiments and everything. Yes, we have talked about that on here. But it's interesting to me how people can see that this happens, how they use the media and everything, but cannot put together that potentially they are themselves are the controlled opposition.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, by what you're seeing in the media, by what you're being told that there is controlled opposition, by not participating in all of those things, that potentially you are actually being controlled. It's always said in the sense that there are these planted people that know they are the opposition party, but they're controlling you with their message that sounds just good enough. But I don't think it's fair to assume that the controlled, quote, controlled opposition knows that they are controlled opposition. Potentially, there are all of these people out here that are being controlled with a message and they have no idea.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Right? Isn't there a term for this where our kids, I think it's Gen Alpha, Gen Z, that they've had the indoctrination and overlay for enough time that they end up acting in certain ways that were already predicted by the powers that be, not even know. Like, they're not hired, they're not paid, they're not told, I'm your boss, I'm your master, but they are simply behaving in the way they were, quote unquote, programmed to behave.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, but I think it's also, there's the term called red pilled, where a red pill is when you figure out this little glimpse of light and then it just illuminates your mind and you start seeing everything clearly. Like, holy cow, how are we lied to? Like, we've been lied to. But then there's a term that has recently come to light, which I've told my team at Stand for Health Freedom, this is not an option for us. It's called black pill.
Black pill. Yep.
Yeah. When like you see this and then everything in your life is cynicism, discouragement, everything is doom and gloom. And by God, the enemy has won. If that's the state that you're living in, you might as well just throw in the towel at that point, because, if the ultimate goal between good and evil is to take our souls. And if our soul is void of joy and void of creativity and void of aspiration and void of connection to people and land, because we're just cynical, we can't be connected to people if we're cynical of every single person, then I just say to the people, like, if we're going to continue stepping forward and creating something for our kids, and they're counting on us. I'll tell you a short story. I was talking to my boys, Isaiah and Samuel. They're in 7th and 2nd grade. And this was the night before Murphy v. Missouri. So it's Missouri v. Biden. The case on free speech. So did Biden violate free speech when his office told the social media companies what could and could not be said about COVID-19, right? So this case was going through to the Supreme Court the next day, and I was telling the boys about it. And I know it's a heavy topic, but we like our boys to appreciate like the beauty of our freedom and our responsibility to protect it. And my Isaiah at the time, he's 12, and he looks at me and says, "Mom, are we going to win?" And I wanted so badly to say like, yes, buddy, but I hesitated because I understand the how big this is. And I came back to center and said, yes, but if we don't, we will re-strategize and find another path to victory. You know, it's like, we're not going to give up on this. We're not just going to say that disinformation, malinformation has taken over the world. And so our children, I saw it in his face, like he's actually counting on us. It's not just a cute saying, you know, like my boys are counting on us to fight. And so to not give up on our kids being able to access truth, being able to access information that determines the decisions they make for themselves and their kids. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, I feel like I need to hear you say these things too, because I think I reside somewhere between red pilled and black pilled now that I'm sitting here thinking about it. And you have a lot more hope for our country than I have. Like I kind of like, we need to keep fighting, but I don't see much happening until we completely collapse and people cannot rely on the government anymore, because there's so much just reliance on monetary, money coming in from the government and things for people. So anyway, I appreciate this conversation for myself, honestly.
Well, Rita, the total collapse, like accepting that is what continues to give me hope. Because if you say, as Americans, if the election doesn't go your way, because both sides are convinced that if it's not their way, we're going to burn in hell. You know what I mean? And so if the election doesn't go your way, whatever way that you're hoping that is for the presidential election, that we're doomed. You know, if you operate under that premise, that's really discouraging. But if you think, you know what, whatever happens is for the good of those who love the Lord. And if this loss is the fastest path to redemption for my nation, I'm here for it.
Yeah,
you know
that's where I'm at. Yep.
This loss is faster redemption. If it's the church wakes up faster because we lose this year, then great. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't say that flippantly at all. I do not say that flippantly, because I do believe we have a responsibility to minimize unnecessary suffering until final justice. You know, and that's why I do what I do. Not because I think I'm God or that I can change outcomes, for the final outcome, but along the way, if we can just help one more person avoid unnecessary suffering for them and their family, it's why we're here. And I'll be honest with you guys, I was at a point of a lot of discouragement. And then one of our team members and one of my dearest mentors, like a mother to me, passed away this year. Her name's Sheila Ely. You might have heard of her. And Sheila had been in this fight for our country, for our democracy, and for health freedom for 30 years. And she worked on the Vote for Health Freedom project until she could not hold her head up anymore. And you know why she did that? Because she truly believed that we were over the target with everything she knew about our democracy, our constitution, the path that we were on, the corruption that existed, what our children need, the state of our healthcare. Like with everything that she held and had observed in all of her wisdom, she felt like we can still make a difference and that we were over the target. And that keeps me going, knowing that she said, this work is worthy and this work is necessary. And I'm like, all right, I have to keep showing up because I know that we're over the target. When New York Times is calling me to talk about it and Washington Post is calling me an NPR, I know that they don't like what we're doing to mobilize people.
Well, that mentor of yours, Sheila, she just sounds like this incredible example of truly understanding the responsibility that comes from living in a country where the people are the ones with the voice, like US, Canada. We don't live in a monarchy. We don't live in a dictatorship. the people have the voice, and that's a massive responsibility. And I truly believe it's one that people don't understand the weight of. They don't understand that the people are the leadership if we're truly understanding our responsibility, right? Like it's very weighty. And a guest that we've had on the podcast before, Matt Boudreau, I think it was him that said, and he was talking about in raising children, like the kids need to understand that their responsibilities come before their freedom. So it's like, they have to clean up their Legos before they get to go play outside. That's the responsibility that comes before the freedom. And the same is true of every citizen, right? Like our responsibility not only comes before our freedom, but it's the gateway to maintaining that freedom, right? Mm-hmm. So that's incredible, that story of that lady. I am so happy that I get to share Pure Annata with all of you. I am extremely picky, as you have probably heard before if you've listened to this podcast for a while, extremely picky about the products that I use in my home and on my body. I do not want anything fake, fragranced, or filled with phthalates or all sorts of microplastics. It is not good for your body. It will disrupt your hormonal system and potentially cause you a lot of issues. So I'm constantly on the lookout for brands that I feel good about to bring into my home and to share with my family. Pure Annata is one of those. They are a cosmetic company founded by a homeschool mom who wanted something safer for her family. And so she created this line of beauty products, which is amazing. I was previously purchasing all natural makeup at a very high price tag. And I wish I would have found Pure Annata sooner because they make it affordable to shop healthy for yourself and for your family. Go to pureannata.ca to see the full line of things they offer.
All right. Do you want to keep moving through that? That whole thing was so good. Like I love talking to you. You're making, I just love this.
Ladies.
Yeah, this is a good conversation. So let's move through these last, or the rest of these phrases here. It's a selection, not an election. What would you tell somebody that says that?
I mean, so yeah, we recognize there's a problem. There's a problem of voter fraud. There's a problem of giving up on valid voting. There's a problem of it's too easy to vote. You know what I mean? Like, none of us are denying there's problems, but where we divide is what is the solution? So can you fix fraud with disengagement?
Yep.
And I'm not willing to give up my voice. If you choose not to vote and then you're unhappy with a policy that comes down the pike that maybe does or does not affect your family, then who are you to have an opinion? And I do want to stay engaged in my city and in the welfare of my city. And so therefore, that's why I keep voting, is because I know that I cannot control all of the fraud, but I can control whether or not I remain a stakeholder. Yeah. And I do think that being, like you said, being visible and vigilant, that responsibility, the vigilance is the responsibility, makes a difference. We've seen it happen. Like, we have truly seen that when the people are vigilant, when the people call out their needs, when the people approach these things and from a standpoint of education, then changes happen. So yes, our elections are not where we want them to be, but what's the solution is the question. Yeah. And we always say, now's not the time to give up. It's the time to stand up. So is it time to give up or stand up? And I think that's where we really have to challenge ourselves.
Yeah. Love what you said there. And like you said earlier, our responsibility is to prevent undue suffering for any individual. And when you said, like, you want to seek the welfare of your city, it just brought to mind that passage in Jeremiah where it says, take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. So, I mean, this is
and the word politics comes from business of the city. And so Jeremiah is telling you, be about the city's business. Mm-hmm. And politics is business of the city. And so there's a mandate biblically for Christians to stay engaged, to be a light in the city. Yes. How can we be that light if we are removed?
Yeah. And obviously it would have looked different for them. Like they wouldn't have had the power of something so simple as a vote, right? But we've been given that much more that we need to then invest back into the welfare, right? It's, it's a huge piece.
So good.
That brings us to, we don't participate in the government of this world. We belong to the kingdom of heaven, which is one of the reasons. And we don't, people saying that they put faith in God, not in man, insinuating that if somebody votes, they're putting their faith in a man, which isn't the same thing. I mean, just think about, like, you don't tell somebody who has cancer and is seeking treatment somewhere, well, I put my faith in God. Like, why are you going to seek treatment anywhere? Why are you putting faith in a man who is offering you some form of medication or nutrition? You know, you don't tell other people going through things that. So how is
some people
voting?
Do, which is sad. But some people do, which is terrible. But
the majority,
I know what you mean. Yeah.
It's just like, there's so many, I don't know. You don't say, well, I don't go to work. I don't try to earn income because I just put faith in God that, you know, manna will fall from heaven. So,
well, and you also, so if you're looking at government structures and they're saying they don't participate in this kingdom because they are of the kingdom of God, they apply that to their family structure. You know, do they choose, if you're a part of the family of God, do you choose not to care for your wife or your children because you're in God's family, not the earthly family? And one of my good friends, he always says that Jethro gave wise counsel to Moses about governing, and that our constitution and local governance within our states is based upon Jethro's counsel to Moses in Exodus 18. He says, select from all the people some capable, honest men who fear God and hate bribes. Appoint them as leaders over groups of 1,000, 100, 50, and 10. So he's describing, you know, start the 1,000, what might be your House of Representatives in that day and time. And then at your state level. So, you know, it gets more and more local. They should always be available to solve the people's common disputes, but have them bring the major cases to you. Let the leaders decide the smaller matters themselves. They will help you carry the load, making the task easier for you. If you follow this advice, and if God commands you to do so, then you will be able to endure the pressures, and all these people will go home in peace. And so Exodus tells us, you know, and our founding fathers relied upon passages like that in order to develop the infrastructure of America. And so I think they say that 3 out of 10 American Christians even bother to vote now.
3 out of 10?
That's what yes. So if you can imagine that if only 30% of the American church is voting because of these notions of I'm a part of God's kingdom, not the earthly kingdom, how much more could we fulfill these biblical mandates if we chose to show up as the church?
Exactly. You know, like, this is the point. Like, people talk about these things from the perspective of where our government is now. But if you go back to the founding and what the intent was, like, that's the goal, is to reduce the size of government and understand what the intent of our government was when it was set up. And if we can get back to that, that's a more beautiful system for everyone, right? I don't know. It's just
freedom. It's freedom because we put this limited government in place, and now everything is subsumed with for your safety. We justify growing big government for your safety. I mean, it's literally public health that has allowed our government infrastructure to balloon and be run by the bureaucrats. And that's why I think that projects like Vote for Health Freedom are so wildly important, because if you look at the modern day agendas, they are all intertwined and interlaced with compliance with a One Health system. And so I think that we can vote according to how we are able to care for our own bodies and our children's, that so much else follows constitutionally as it relates to religious freedom, parental rights, privacy.
Yeah. Another excuse we get a lot is two wings, same bird. And talking about going back to the founding, I recommend this book all the time. I think I've recommended it on this podcast at least 10 times, but The 5,000 Year Leap, it's so good. If y'all don't have it, get it. It's about America's founding, and you will be able to speak to these issues much better. But not you specifically, you're speaking to these issues wonderfully. I'm just saying, like, as a listener, this book is so helpful. But people say two wings, same bird as if it's a negative thing. But this was part of the founding, actually. Two wings of the eagle. The founders' view of their new form of government can be further demonstrated by using the symbol of the eagle and referring to its two wings. For those watching, maybe you can see this picture. And it says, wing one of the eagle might be referred to as the problem-solving wing or the wing of compassion. Those who function through this dimension of the system are sensitive to the unfulfilled needs of the people. They dream of elaborate plans to solve these problems. Wing two has the responsibility of conserving the nation's resources and the people's freedoms. It functions to analyze the programs of wing one with two questions. First, can we afford it? Secondly, what will it do to the rights of individual freedom and of the people? So it goes on to talk more about that, but it's saying, like, we can fly on a more straight path if both wings are functioning equally and well.
Yeah, it kind of redeems the negative connotation that people have now, right?
Yeah, because I get it. Like, I get what people are saying. Like, oh, it doesn't matter who gets in. It's the same difference, either way. But really, it's not the same. And it also plays into the next phrase of the candidates are all awful. Well, we're all human, in my opinion, and we all have our flaws, but are the candidates equally awful? No. No. The policies are different.
That's why people need to vote in their primaries. You know what I mean?
Yes.
If you're disenchanted with the party system, if you don't want to rely on the party system anymore, then show up to your primaries, because that's when you have 2, 3, 4 people running on the same party ticket, and you want the one who can't be bought. You know what I mean? And can we actually know that? I don't even know if we can actually know that about ourselves until push comes to shove. But can you know that about another person if they've already been in office, perhaps, or if they've been in a position to prove that to you? But you vote in your primaries so that we can get the least viable person possible in those positions, because the reality is that the lobby is strong. And one of the reasons the lobby is so strong is because the people aren't showing up. So there's no oversight and vigilance from the people as stakeholders. And so the lobby industry is the only stakeholder. And that's how they picture that table of stakeholders, is those in the corporate America who buy and sell according to that industry. So
I just looked up lobbying expenditures the other day on Open the Books, or Open Secrets, not Open the Books. Oh my gosh. I was looking because a certain social media personality that a lot of people follow, that because she says she's unbiased, and I'm like, whatever, nobody's unbiased, but you can say your center maybe, but I don't think that's the case with this person. Anyway, I was looking it up because she was talking about, sadly, the most recent school shooting and about the golden calf that people hold with their guns and things like that. And so I was like, how much actually is spent on the gun lobby? And I think it was in 2023, it was like 14 million, which sounds like a lot, but they have like the top 20 on Open Secrets, top 20 lobbying expenditures, and gun rights does not even fall close to that. The lowest one on the top like 20 was TV, movies, and music, and that was at 70 million. The top 2 lobbies were exactly what you think the problems with our youth that are causing these problems are. Pharmaceuticals and health products was $378.6 million in 2023. The second one, electronics manufacturing and equipment, $238.4 million. And and there's even more spent on health, because health services and HMOs is down the list as a separate category. Internet is a separate category at 100 million. Health professionals is another category at 93 million. So look how much is being spent in the health sector. So anyway, my point is lobbyists, I totally got on a tangent here, but you brought up lobbying and it just got me thinking.
Right. Are we leaving the lobby to shape policy?
Yes.
Unchecked. You mean,
yes.
Are they unchecked? Do they even get to hear the people's side of the story? Yeah. And that's exactly why we started Stand for Health Freedom, because we saw people floundering with, who do I contact when, with what message, what power does this person even have over these types of policies? Is it federal, state, local issue? What do they want to hear about? What do they actually care about? And so the lobby studies that daily. They show up daily. And so with the people, how do we show up as stakeholders? And if we're not stakeholders, then can we actually complain? So that oversight matters. Your representatives don't know that you care about the issue until you tell them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the last one, I think it feels empowering is the last one, but we basically covered that it's not empowering to not vote. But the last one we could cover here is my vote doesn't count. It's not worth it anymore based on corruption or being in a wholly red or wholly blue state where you feel like your voice doesn't matter.
Winning isn't the only pressure point. If you're in a squarely red district and you want blue to win, and you and your friends still show up to vote according to issues, and you all take 30% of a vote or 20% of a vote when historically 7% has been the challenging vote, then that shows the incumbent or the controlling party that there are specific issues that they better pay attention to because there's an uprising. So there's other ways to evidence your voice, to put your voice forward to, other than just winning. And sometimes winning is the long game. Like, how do we move the ball down the field? How do we grow a certain party within our community if there's injustices that require that party's presence? So I think that we realize those strategies, going back to biblical mandates, to be shrewd and to come forward with strategy, not just simply what's on the surface and giving up when we don't like the outcome. So I understand that feeling. I understand that, especially with the urbanization, that it feels like there's certain outcomes that we cannot affect. And, people who live in Washington State and they're largely not represented by those values that win the day, they have a larger uphill battle than some other states do. And there are still people holding the line and calling things out within their state houses simply because they know what's at stake if they don't.
Absolutely. I very much feel that living in Illinois. Everything downstate from Chicago is basically conservative. We are a very conservative state, but we have Chicago controlling our politics. And we do have wonderful state representatives, who fight, even though it's often a losing battle, and they're still speaking out. Almost more so, it's like they see the problems that come with legislating this way. And so I feel like our state representatives who are conservative are more outspoken than those in Indiana, which is the state you're in, my neighboring state. So,
and we've had some wins in Illinois. To speak to that, there was an HPV mandate that came down the pike in beginning of 2020. And we had in Illinois, they use something called like a witness slip. You don't have to show up to testify or even write a message. You can just click, you find the bill number, and you either click support or oppose. So then the committee can see how many Illinois constituents support or oppose. Like, where are we? Is there a huge imbalance? Is there a huge favorite? And we had over 80,000 witness slips to oppose the HPV mandate and being added to the childhood schedule there in Illinois. And they even took the witness slips down, but that mandate was ultimately defeated and withdrawn. So it's like
a lot of times when they get a lot of witness slips, they'll be like, oh, we're going to table this for now. And then we'll do the committee next week. And so then everybody has to scramble to refile witness slips or doesn't find out about it, but they still get the message.
Right. Yeah. Right. And we have it on file. Like, we can say, hey, look, like, these witness slips were filed. What is your response? And when they don't listen, you have a story to take to the media to say, wow, this is clearly not what the Illinoisans wanted, but it's what happened. And we have some questions about that. And So that's just one example of, there was corruption involved. They tried to dismantle the witness slips, but the bill still ultimately was withdrawn. And there was another issue like that in Maryland. They were trying to lower the age of consent for health services for children. And they said there was no age. So it was whatever that provider deemed as competent or informed consent, even including children with disabilities. And the child could consent, but they could not descent from a service. So zero common sense. And so we got loud about this policy, opposed it because minor consent laws are very important to us. And then the author, when we went to the media, the author ended up withdrawing the bill. And so it's like there are other ways to strategically make our voices heard, even if the election isn't won. And one of those is simply running a primary opponent. Another one is simply having a greater margin eaten out of the default winner. So yeah, I hear you. Sometimes it doesn't feel good to be in a gridlocked position as it relates to voting. But the more information that people have about the candidates' values, the truer the elections become and absent fraud. So it's just, it's a dance. It's not, right now, it's not fun. It takes a lot of grit.
Yeah, well, if you consider the fact that people might sit out because, say, in Illinois, we're solidly a blue state when it comes to national elections, and people are sitting out potentially because they just think, oh, my vote doesn't count. And that just keeps increasingly happening, even though there might be a shift in what people are thinking. You'll never see that shift in an outcome if people continue to just increasingly sit out because they see us becoming increasingly blue. It may just be because people are sitting out, which I don't think it is. But does that make sense? We can't just sit down and sit on our hands and say, oh, well, we can't do anything about that. I did a poll, which kind of spurred a lot of this conversation because I had seen the movement of people deciding not to vote. And it was interesting to me. There was 11% of my poll that was actually undecided or completely decided that they were not going to vote. And so when you look at the statistics of people who actually do vote in the past elections and then how the election was won, and knowing that a lot of these states that decided the national election in 2020 were won with under 3%, some of them with only like 0.2% of the vote, that has potential for massive change.
Mm-hmm. It's, speaking of the undecided, swing states, how much is that?
Well, and I mean undecided on whether they're even going to vote.
True. And that's, being undecided on whether or not you'll vote, it's who is standing down. Just like Cecily said about forfeiting, you know what I mean? And there was a friend sent me something yesterday that says it was a ad to get out the vote in the ERs. And it says, in every clinic and hospital across America, there's untapped potential to strengthen our democracy. We can heal our communities through inclusive democracy by healthcare facilities playing an integral role in nonpartisan voter registration. Join the movement today. Participate in a healthier democracy. So if you have hospital corporations registering people to vote who are regularly using their services, then there's one ideology that's going to show up. Yep. If you have Google sending out 2.5 more times notices, don't forget to vote, don't forget to register to vote, to one party than the other. And guess what? It's the party that favors censorship right now. Yep. So if you have Google pushing that ideology to vote, then who's standing down? And so I think you should have to ask yourself, are you okay? Are you okay with losing your voice? Are you okay with an ideology that you do not espouse winning and not being able to have an opinion about it? And you might be able to say, absolutely. I'm completely unaffected by this. And that's just a question that we need to ask ourselves before we completely disengage.
Well, that's what I was telling my husband the other night that worries me a bit, and some followers online, because I posted something about just after watching the 18-minute Kamala interview, if you want to even call it that, where I was just like, I just feel like, like I'm watching this happen, her be put forth as our president without even like, I don't know. It just feels like that's what's going to happen. And I just had felt that night. So I had posted about it and people are like, well, it's because it's all theater. And I'm like, no, what I'm saying is there's potential for a legitimate win here simply from seeing online the talk on both sides of the aisle, where it seems almost as if the liberal side, they can't tell you why they want to vote for Kamala. Like you can see the interviews for the man on the street, like, well, I don't know, but they're still very excited to vote. And then on the other side, you have all of these passionate conservatives that can tell you exactly why they are not going to vote. Like they can tell you exactly what policies they like and they don't like, but they're passionate about not voting because of something that they don't like. And so I'm like, oh, when you have those two things happening at the same time, that can be a recipe for a legitimate win.
Right.
On the Democrat side.
Do we want our electoral process to be based on uneducated voters? You know, people are worried about who is a legitimate voter, quote unquote legitimate, wherever you stand on that issue. They're worried about, you know, a number of things, but are you okay with that population deciding the electoral process? And I think that going back to the Google, what do they call it? It's where Google like decides elections. There's some fraud in them determining how search engine manipulation. That's what I was looking for. Search engine manipulation. Yeah. So that based on the top two hits, behavior can be altered. And they say that like 43% of undecided on whatever topic, election specifically, will go in the way of Google's values. You know, because Google's not guiding people based on unbiased whole picture, you know, and not even based on just ad spending, but literally the search and manipulation is based on creating a population that behaves like Google's values. And so if we want the election to end up based on all these people who just simply go to Google and are persuaded on search engine manipulation, then I guess you can be okay with that. But I personally, since I know what values I'm taking to the polls and I know who I'm voting for according to those values, I would rather there be more participation along those lines than not.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, yeah. Okay, so the last couple of things I want to talk about are the Jones Plantation movie. I don't know if our listeners will be familiar with Larkin Rose, but the freedom movement, the sovereign movement, I guess is what they would call themselves. This is what I'm sent out a lot. Like, watch this Jones Plantation movie. It describes everything. And so basically it goes through like there are slaves and a slave owner on a plantation. I'm just going to describe it really quick, but there's a 12-minute movie we'll drop in the show notes so you guys can all watch to know exactly what we're talking about. But there's a slave owner, slaves, and there's plantations all around them, also with slaves and slave owners. But the owner sees that the slaves are getting restless and he's having to work them harder because they're unwilling and uncooperative. So he brings in this problem solver. And the problem solver essentially is like, just follow along with me. Like, this is what we're going to do. And it's this big secret plan to allow the slaves to feel like they are empowered by way of telling them that they have ownership and a stake in the plantation and that they can vote eventually for who they want to lead the plantation, either Mr. Jones, the original owner, or his cousin. And it just goes through this whole step. And it's supposed to be a mirror of what is happening within our government. So I have thoughts on it, but I want to hear what you guys thought after watching that.
Yeah, I mean, who do you want to go first?
I don't care.
You're the guest, so if you have thoughts, Leah, you go ahead.
You know, they make fun of some of the, you know, within that video that you're describing, they say something to the effect of, oh, well, everyone has a voice. You have 2 minutes to speak it. And so they're talking about the public process of bringing forth testimony, et cetera. But you're voice is not reduced to what is on record publicly. So it's just like, it's an incomplete picture in my opinion. And I do feel like I have a voice, and I feel like I'm empowered to know how to use that voice. And I think that we would be in a better place if more people knew how to use their voice. And I also know that, yes, the Constitution is a contract, that it is a contract between the people and our state government, between the state and the federal, on what sort of government we view as helpful to protect freedom. If anarchy is seen as the ultimate freedom, perhaps, but you have to recognize that that civility requires some understanding. Clarity is king when it comes to relationship with humans. And so you extrapolate that outside of the home. How hard do you work for clarity within your most intimate relationships? Now think about relationships with those that you're building roads with and that you're building schools with and as a community. And so it just is a matter of, are we vigilant enough to know what that contract is and when that contract is being kept or broken is my response, because most Americans are constitutionally illiterate. They don't understand and have never even read the Constitution. Our kids are not forced to read the Constitution within the constructs of public education. So I would challenge us to really test our understanding of, is there a contract? And I'm sure that some people who consider themselves sovereigns, they might know the Constitution better than I do. I don't know. However, my position is that I am fully for limited government, but I am also fully for there being a mechanism, a representative mechanism in place to help us protect our freedom, and for that, a contract for that purpose.
I would say, I would agree with you. But one thing that stuck out to me, and maybe this is me just being a little bit weird about it, but I kind of think it was a little bit offensive to people who have a history of slavery in their family, that they took a plantation and made it appear that like 99% of these slaves were fooled. And I'm like, that's actually quite disrespectful. And I know that their implication is that we're also those 99% that are fooled if we believe that we should have systems of government in place like this. But I just found that kind of distasteful. And I feel like that's not normally accepted in our culture. And I'm usually not one that's super sensitive about that, but I'm surprised that this has gone forward and no one's been like, hey, it's kind of offensive to suggest that all of those slaves were fooled by this super obvious ploy,
Yeah. I didn't look at it from that perspective because I don't know that they were saying that actually happened to slaves. But when you bring up offense, it is like kind of lowering the harm that was done by slavery by comparing it to us in the modern system of our government. Yeah. But one thing that these sovereigns often say is that by voting, we're giving consent to be governed. And to that, I would say is like, no one is asking for your consent. Like no one is asking. And so by not participating in a system of voting, you're not withdrawing your consent and you're not escaping. I know some of these people probably don't pay taxes because they've somehow like found a way to fly below the radar for now. But I know there have been people who consider themselves sovereigns arrested for not paying taxes and things. And so you are ultimately in the system, whether you like it or not, even if you're escaping for the moment, your quote responsibility, which they would hate that term. But for me, like you said, it was a very oversimplified view. And I do think that it is very easy for an American who has always lived in the comfort of America, and I know it's not always comfortable, but compared to other places, it is much more comfortable, right? To say the grass is greener on the side of anarchy or something that we have never experienced. It's easy to say that that person has it easier over there if you've never lived that person's experience.
I mean, it's a lovely fantasy. I think that there are a lot of us who wish we had way less regulation and way less,
absolutely,
being told how to do what and when and where. But that's the fact of the matter is we're already in a system. I don't know. I'm not willing to give up my phone and my computer and my access to the outside world. And, I think that, so if I were, maybe I would have a different opinion. But the reality is that I am a part of a system. And so it's my job and my responsibility to do what I can to influence how that is shaped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the people that are saying this to me are accessing me through their phone, on Instagram and things. So I'm hearing this.
Oh, on Instagram. So it's not just a phone that has no camera or microphone or.
No. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, so they are part, whether they see it or not. And I would say also, some of these people think I'm a fool for voting and say like, you're consenting to be governed. No, actually, I'm not. Like, if you look at what happened during 2020 and COVID years, like, yes, I am voting for what I feel is best, but these things still happen to me in my life. I still had laws brought down and mandates brought down from government that affected me, but I still had a choice. I still could say, no, I am not going along with this. And I had a choice to, yes, I lost my job over it, but I can choose to do something different. I do have a choice. Nobody is holding me down, forcing me to do these things. And so you can participate in voting and still not consent to everything the government is doing to you.
Mm-hmm. Right. There's always an option to be non-compliant. It's just non-compliant at what cost?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Some people's price is much lower, some is much higher, but yeah, non-compliance is always an option. And sometimes the hour requires it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I don't know if I can say this on podcast, but I'm going to. I always think I'll probably have the IRS and the FBI knocking on my door tomorrow. I don't know. My husband will be like, well, why are we getting audited? Okay. I'm like, I don't think anything's going to really change with the way our government spends until like everybody stops paying their taxes. We do faithfully pay our taxes, but like, I think that's what it takes for the spending to change. So anyway, when you speak to there being a cost, the cost at that point would be essentially jail, if you just stop paying your taxes and refuse to pay them. But, when we talk about people making a change and changing their behaviors in order to change the way we are governed, not voting is not the way, in my opinion. There are other ways that we could enact change in a much quicker fashion. So anyway,
yeah, absolutely.
You don't have to agree with that. I know that's like a radical statement.
There always has to be a strategy. We have to be nimble and versatile and find a strategy when we see something that's not right.
I know so many of us are looking for ways to keep our families healthy while avoiding the doctor's office. And one of the ways that Cecily and I have both found to do this is homeopathy. We have both benefited from homeopathy and specifically Remedy Collective. They have been one of the ways that we have learned to care for our family. It's helped us not only with their remedies, but also the learning process. We each have their first aid kit. And in that first aid kit comes a guide with a list of problems that describes what remedy to use for what problem. It's been so helpful to have on hand. So if you guys are interested in learning more about homeopathy, but also having remedies to keep on hand for you and your family, go to remedycollective.com/boomclappodcast and use the code BOOMCLAP to save 10% on your order. All right. So tell people where they can find you outside of here, because I know you described all the things that your organization is doing, and people would be wise to find you and participate.
Yes. Go to standforhealthfreedom.com and sign up for our newsletter. Join. We send you calls to action when there are reasons to use your voice, to take a stand. So if you open those emails and read them and click to take action, it's super easy. And then you can share with others. And we are running one of our biggest campaigns right now, and that's Vote for Health Freedom 2024. This is our final stand for America, for health freedom, for our children. And so we endeavor to bring you voter guides not influenced by Google on how to vote for the underpinnings of health freedom, which is religious freedom, privacy, informed consent, free speech, and parental rights. And so we vet our candidates based on those 5 values and then help you know how you can support their run for office. So thanks so much, ladies. I appreciate the conversation and the ability to share Vote for Health Freedom with other people. We have seen it make a difference. For example, in the state of Louisiana, we had 2023 off-year elections. Their entire state house was up for election, their governor, attorney general, and helped elect 48 health freedom candidates. And then the very next legislative session, they passed 11. It was 9 bills and 2 resolutions. So the governor signed 11 pieces of health freedom policy. And that included things such as, if you put out a medical mandate for a school child, you have to also include their rights, their exemptions. If schools cannot discriminate based on vaccine status of any vaccination in the state of Louisiana now, that's the first bill of its kind across the nation. COVID vaccine cannot be required for school or university. So just lots of great bills that were passed there.
Good bills,
in the very next school year. So that was 2023 elections, 2024 policies. This school year, there was I don't want to state it wrong. I think I have it written down right here. I think it was a 50% increase in non-medical vaccine exemptions.
Wow.
So yeah, it was, I can't find it. But yeah, it was an insane increase.
Wow.
In the non-medical vaccine exemptions just one cycle later, based on the good policy and getting the right people into office that will hear these common sense solutions. That if we bring them common sense solutions, instead of just being angry, instead of taking our ball and going home, then we can fight for something different for our kids. We can take a stand that means something and that has an impact. So yeah, join us at Stand for Health Freedom. We're building the largest growing voting bloc for health freedom in the nation. And we've seen it make a big difference.
Oh, that's awesome.
Well, we appreciate you so much coming on. Guys, send this. If you have a friend that doesn't know if they're going to vote or doesn't see the value in voting, I think when this comes out, the deadline will be very close to register in a lot of states. So make sure you send this to them right away. Give them some hope to get to the polls and everything. But we appreciate you coming on with us today. And next week, we have an exciting episode. Am I telling everybody who's coming on with us? We've been revealing our next week episodes for you guys, so you know what's coming up. We have Willie Robertson. We talked to him about his new book, Gospeller, right? I pronounced that right, Cecily?
Yeah.
It's a great conversation just about sharing the gospel with people and not having to be a pastor to do it. You can just, as a regular person who loves Jesus, go out and share the gospel and spread the word with others. So anyway, we appreciate you guys listening. Please leave us a review if you haven't yet. Those just propel our podcast to new listeners, and we appreciate it greatly. Like, that is the best thing that we can wake up to in the morning is a new, kind, written review. So you can find us outside the podcast at Boom Clap Podcast on Instagram. You can find me, Rita, at RitaRogersCo.com or Rita Rogers Co on Instagram.
And you can find me, Cecily, on Instagram at Cecily.Dickey or my website, thegracetogrow.com. Thanks for listening.